What's up, yo? This is a special edition of the podcast. It's a collaborative podcast, one I've done with Cindy Wagman over at the Small Nonprofit podcast. If you've never heard it before, you should go on over, take a listen, subscribe. It's great. It's one of my favorites for many reasons, most of all because of the opening music. So I'm going to play a bit of that now. I'm going to let you hear her music, let her hear her intro and introduce herself. And then we'll just go straight into the podcast. You can listen to it here. You can listen to it over there. We are very happy to have done this together. So here we go.
Welcome to the Small Nonprofit Podcast with down-to-earth practical advice on how to get things done in your small organization. You are going to change the world and we can help.
You're listening to Simon Scriver's amazingly ultimate fundraising superstar podcast, talking all things fundraising, charities, nonprofits, and more. Here's your host, as always, Simon Scriver.
Simon Scriver is a fundraising coach and consultant based in Ireland, and he's been fundraising since 2004 and loves it. He looks forward to work every day and realizes that everyone can have a job they love. Today is a very special podcast episode because we are airing this on two podcasts. So I host the Small Nonprofit here in Canada, and Simon is in Ireland with his podcast. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hello, this is Simon here, and I'm delighted to be collaborating with Cindy. I also run a podcast, which is Simon Scriver's amazingly ultimate fundraising superstar podcast. And so I was fortunate enough to meet Cindy this year, and we got into a big chat about small charities. We both do a lot of work with small charities and getting them started in their fundraising. And we thought it would be good to pick each other's brains and actually podcast swap.
Mm-hmm. So this will be aired across the world, really. And whichever podcast you tune into, you will hear the same conversation. So don't worry about missing out, but definitely subscribe to both of ours because they're both awesome. So we're going to talk a little bit about starting from scratch. We see so many small organizations, both of us here and in Ireland, that are stuck. They don't know where to get started with their fundraising, and so they don't get started. Or they sort of do fundraising off the side of their desk, and it never grows because it's always an afterthought or something that's not a priority. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to give you the tools to be able to take a step back and really think about how to be deliberate in your actions so that you will start to do more fundraising in a more meaningful way. So the first thing is that we really want, mindset is such a big piece of what holds people back in their fundraising. And so Simon, I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the taking that first step to really reframe what fundraising is and what it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, I think, with the organizations we work with, they're obviously all very different, but they often, generally follow the same paths, or when it comes to starting fundraising, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of crossover. And what I found, or what you and I have talked about a lot, is one of the first steps is this idea that we have to get the organization into the mindset of fundraising, and I suppose manage their expectations around fundraising. So usually you're dealing with small or medium organizations who see fundraising as, you probably heard the phrase like a necessary evil, or it feels like an imposition or professional begging, or all these kind of negative connotations of what fundraising is. And perhaps the fundraising they've dabbled in has been a bit like this. If you're talking about cold calling, or if you're talking about trying to sort of forcing or tricking people into giving you money, then maybe it does feel like that. But that's not really the area you and I work in. Instead, what we're trying to do is show people that people out there want to help. They want, everyone wants to make the world a better place in some shape or form. And so what we're trying to do is find those people and connect them with the work that your organization is doing. So when you move away from trying to get strangers to care about you, and instead trying to find people who have the same values as you and are on the same page as you, and showing them how they can help, that becomes really, really lovely fundraising. It becomes really positive, and one that doesn't annoy people, that doesn't put them out. It empowers people, and it gets people on side of it. So it's about changing the mindset very early on of an organization. That's what we're doing with fundraising, is connecting to people who really care, but also trying to get people within the organization to see that fundraising, the fundraiser in the organization isn't an outcast, isn't stuck in a room by themselves, but fundraising flows through everything the organization is doing in a really positive way.
Yeah, I find that that mindset is such a barrier for people. And part of it is, and we're going to talk about this around how, like, who we're asking for money and how, and all of those kinds of things. But starting with understanding your organization and its goals. And so one of the first things that we do when we come into an organization, or when I've worked in-house, is start by engaging the staff. Internal relationships are equally, if not more important than your external ones. And you need to listen and understand your staff and what their hopes and aspirations are from your organization. And so I will actually buy everyone a coffee, sit down one-on-one with them, and start to hear from them about their work. Really important to understand in a meaningful way what they do day to day, but also how they want to grow and change over time if they were better resourced. And I love that as an exercise in embedding yourself as a fundraiser, or the function of fundraising within an organization, to really start off on the right foot and understand where the opportunities are.
Yeah, I mean, it helps, I think, to think of them as almost like a segment on your database. The staff and the board are another segment on the database who you're going to be, for want of a better word, you're going to be marketing to. So it's almost this internal marketing where we're going to be communicating with them. We're going to be selling fundraising a little bit. We're going to be asking them questions and like you said, understanding them one-on-one, and then working with them to achieve their goals, which are going to line up with the goals that we as fundraisers are going to achieve. Absolutely.
And I think the more that they can relate to you personally as a fundraiser, or whoever is doing that fundraising, the more likely you'll get their support, right? If you come in as, every 6 months, be like, I need this information or I need that, you become your job, as opposed to if you go in on a regular basis and build meaningful relationships, you are a person who has a job and they can be part of that job in a meaningful way. So I think that that's really an important first step in terms of figuring out what your fundraising can and should look like.
Yeah. I mean, I've had people who are very disappointed sometimes that the program staff or co-workers don't get involved with fundraising events and things like that. But we have to understand that these people, these on the other side, they have a week of work dealing with maybe some horrific stuff on the program side of it. And then for us to expect them to come to some quiz, on their Friday evening is maybe unrealistic. Yeah. So let's instead try and understand what they're willing to do and what motivates them and what doesn't motivate them. And let's try and work with them. They have a role in fundraising. It's not necessarily asking. It's not necessarily going to an event. It might be introductions. It might be sharing stories. It might just be communicating things with you. But let's figure it out, and let's humanize ourselves so that they want to help us. And then when they see this help working, as you said before, Cindy, that it's almost addictive. If they get positive results out of it, if they like dealing with you as a fundraiser, then they're going to want to do it more, and fundraising becomes easier.
Exactly. I think those small early wins that are not necessarily a hard ask, like you and I have talked about involving staff in thank you calls and giving them things where they can be successful in fundraising without actually being put in a position where they feel uncomfortable. And the more wins you get with that, the more likely they will start to push themselves around their comfort and start to see and understand what fundraising is really like and that it's not so evil.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do next, so I think it is so foundational to your success as a fundraiser to start internally. We both do. Number one action you can take to get started. Then we start to look externally. And this is really important as well, is to start to listen to your donors and start to understand. Now that you understand how the staff think and talk about your organization, you want to figure out how the external people talk and think about your organization, because it might not be totally the same, but there are definitely points of intersection that you want to leverage. And I love, this is one of my favorite parts, I love meeting donors for the first time or conducting donor surveys because you get so much insight. And I love to listen and ask good questions and have meaningful conversation. What do you
Are you just
helpful?
Nosy? Is that why you love it? You're just nosy?
I want to know.
Yeah, tell me everything.
Maybe. So the funny thing is I always listen and ask questions. And in the back of my mind, I have like almost like my own mini database of like all the work that our organization will do. And I'm like, oh, there's a point of intersection. There's a point of intersection. So it's kind of like a mini computer. And then I purposefully, this is going to sound really manipulative, but like when I hit one of those points, then I'll deep dive or I'll sort of like push around that area a little bit more and try and uncover more insight from them. So I'm trying to think of a good example. It's very calculated, but at the same time, it doesn't come across as calculated because I am genuinely interested and I really try listen. But the flip side of that is what are they excited about? And so when they're excited about something where there's that spark of like, hey, we do this, that's actually where the magic happens.
Well, I think it's like when you vocalize it and when you try and explain it, it sounds manipulating and calculative. But it's a very human thing, and you know we've all been in those conversations with people who love talking about themselves and keep talking about stuff that we're not interested in, and no one wants to be a part of that conversation. Whereas when you're with the conversation, someone's genuinely interested in you and brings in, you know, information or facts or stories that are relevant to what you're already interested in, that's when relationships deepen. That's what all your friends are. All your friends are people who know what you like, share stuff with you that's relevant to what you like. And so that's what we're trying to do as an organization as well, is meet them on their wavelength. And share stuff that's relevant to them. I mean, the most simplest of examples that I sometimes use, which is kind of, you know, a bit patronizing, but if you're in an animal sanctuary, you don't talk about dogs to a cat person, and you don't talk about cats to a dog person. Totally. And you know, that's a really oversimplified, but we do that in so many ways with other organizations. We tell them what we think they want to hear about, as opposed to taking the time to figure out, okay, what is this person actually interested in, and what are they actually trying to achieve? And do we fit anywhere with that? Can we help them do that?
I'll give you another analogy of it, because it is very human to find those connections. I read a fantastic book I actually highly recommend, especially for people who have to fundraise who are not fundraisers. It's called Captivate by Vanessa Van Edwards. And it's basically what we're describing is, you know, when you meet someone for the first time and you start a conversation and it sort of gravitates very naturally to like, what are you watching on Netflix? We as humans find those points of similarity naturally. That is how our conversations go. And we use things like Netflix as a tool to do that. And so that's basically what we're talking about. It's not so evil and diabolical. Yeah. It's really just tapping into human nature. What are the things that we can connect on and get excited about together?
Yeah. So in terms of finding out more about donors, what kind of ways are you asking them questions? What kind of ways are you actually reaching out to them?
Mm-hmm. So we love doing donor surveys, and of course you get some great feedback. We always we always have some open-ended questions, and especially around how they talk about or think about or the work. And so that's one key one. I love face-to-face meetings. I feel like you get so much more when you're looking at someone and when they're looking at you. And I find it easier to play off of their interest. Like, it's just people wear so much of their emotions on their face. And similarly, they can feed off of my energy and excitement. I'd like to think that when I'm working as a fundraiser, and actually in any capacity, I've been told that people feel like I'm very authentic and approachable and friendly. And that always comes across best face-to-face, in my experience. And you want to be, when you are having these conversations, natural, comfortable, authentic, curious. Don't go in with like a script or anything like that. Again, think of the Netflix analogy as like, you just want to listen and be curious. And so face-to-face and asking directly for feedback. Tell me why you support this organization. What's it been like as a donor? What are you most excited about? And those are sort of spark questions. The real depth of information comes as we talk further about any one of those areas. So follow-up questions that you can't prepare for because you don't know what they're going to be. Phone calls work as well. I know you're a big phone person. After all, I've gone all on about the benefit of face-to-face, but phone is great too. And you can usually get a lot more volume done for less resources, especially time.
I think like any of those ways, obviously you're balancing time with resources. The more personal you can be, the better. But I think, and any of these ways, it's about just doing it, isn't it? I think we very often are afraid to talk to our donors sometimes because we don't know what to say. And questions are a great way of doing it because you're not really saying anything, but you're encouraging them to speak. I had a client a while ago who hadn't emailed her mailing list for a while, and because she didn't know what to say. And so we just sent out a 2-sentence email, which was basically, hey, do you mind if I ask why you signed up to the newsletter in the first place? And it was such an easy thing to do. We didn't spend days crafting it. We didn't have to design it. It was just plain text. And the responses we got back, there were some really lovely stories in there and people feeling like we actually cared about them or were interested in them. So, I mean, I think the key thing is just to do it. So whether it's face-to-face, phone, or email or post, whatever, just start these conversations.
Absolutely.
Because good things come out of them.
Yeah. Two areas where I see people get stuck with this, because this comes up a lot. I always, always, always believe you should go and listen to your donors all the time. One is you look at your list and you're like, where do I start? Who do I talk to? I don't have a $10,000 donor. I might not even have a $500 donor, and you can be like, well, is it worth my time, or do they want to hear from me at this level? And yes, absolutely. So I always start at the top. If you're talking about major gifts or anything, there's, people who are giving you a large amount of money for your organization, or people who are giving regularly over time. So monthly donors or loyal annual donors, doesn't matter how much. Those are the people I typically, because you can't obviously engage with everyone at that level. That's usually where I start. So don't stop yourself if you don't think that you have people who can qualify as like valuable to have these conversations. All of your donors are super valuable. The other thing I see organizations get really stuck with is not even being able to book those meetings. So I have seen, so first of all, I think making sure that whoever you're asking for these meetings or to have the conversation, they know that you're asking for feedback. Oftentimes we see, especially with donors who are not your typical philanthropists, they're like, oh, you don't need to talk to me. I'm not that important, or I don't want to give you another gift right now, which isn't to know forever. It's just like, I don't want to give you another gift right now.
Yeah.
And that they put up those barriers right away. And so I see a lot of organizations struggle with this, which is just to be open and say, we're not asking for more money right now, but your support has been really important to us. And I want to get to know you more. And I want to understand your giving. Usually if I'm new to an organization, or if our company is doing work at the beginning, we use the newbie card. We're new, we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback. So there are always excuses around why not to do this. But again, it's reaching out to those people who are most dedicated. You're going to find some yeses, and don't be discouraged by no's, and don't focus too much of your time and energy on getting a yes from the no's in this. Actually, I kind of believe that in all areas of fundraising, which is there are people who will talk to you. So move on. Learn when to just, you can come back to those people eventually, but instead of chasing people over and over again, continue and move on to the people who do want to have that conversation.
And I think there's a positive in the no's as well, that, just by asking people for their thoughts or their advice, or even asking for a gift, when someone says no, like you said, it's often, it can be thought of as a not yet. But you also get feedback about why they're saying no. You also, if you're asking them for advice, they can, feel touched that you've asked them. If you're inviting them to an event, people always get upset about people not coming to their events. But just to be invited to an event is a positive thing, even if they don't turn to it. So the key thing is to start talking to them. Not imposing on them, not making them feel uncomfortable, but just starting a conversation with people. The more in fundraising, the more conversations you have, the more money comes in. It's just like directly connected.
Yeah.
And so a big role of ours as fundraisers is to communicate.
And I think that's really important to understand. So a lot of people listening will probably say, okay, when are we asking? Right? And managing those expectations and setting those expectations around what fundraising really in practice looks like, which is like 99% not asking. It's all the other things. But it also takes time, right? Like now you've spent some time talking internally and listening and building relationships with staff. Then you're going to your donors, whatever, let's call them your most loyal donors. Now you're like, 3 months in or something like that. And there's a lot of pressure. And I've seen this and heard this a lot. Like, where's the money? Like, how are we going to start paying for your position? In your experience, let's talk about how we can manage those expectations and not be pulled away from what we know is the important work to do in chasing, these other things that seem like quick cash.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a few bows to that. I mean, firstly, it is that managing expectations again. Your CEO and your board, they need to understand that the money doesn't come in straight away from a lot of people and a lot of organizations, because it takes time to build trust, and people don't give money until they have a bit of trust and a bit of a relationship there. So, it might be something that really should have been addressed at the job interview stage, that if the board is saying, well, we're going to need to see this in the first month, that you're saying, well, that's just not possible. But obviously most of our listeners are going to be in their positions. And so I think, while we still need to be building these relationships and understanding most of it takes time, perhaps there's probably already going to be some quick wins in there. So we can look at people that we already have relationships with. So there's going to be, companies who are already on the radar, people who have already come across your organization. And so one of the early exercises you want to do is look at all those touch points and look at people who are already coming across your organization, whether they're, I don't know, I mean, they could be service users, they could be companies who supply your toilet paper, they could be your landlord, they could be people who've come to your website to get information in the past. They could be people who know you personally from previous roles, or people who are related to your coworkers. And so those are people where there's already a level of trust, and those conversations, we can get quicker wins with those while we're deepening the other relationships. And so I think that's a very early exercise, is looking at every segment, every type of person that comes across your organization or is on your radar, and thinking, okay, how can I move them to the next level?
Yeah.
And it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be asking questions and having conversations and figuring out what they're trying to achieve and where you fit in on that.
Exactly. It's the path of least resistance, or that lowest hanging fruit, is not necessarily the biggest dollars. It's the people who are closest to you and the people who know and care about your work. And there's enough of those people that should be able to make a pretty significant impact in the early days.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I always say, if you're doing good fundraising, you'll never have to cold call. If you get really big, then you might start looking at cold people. But actually what we're trying to do here is warmify people. And so you're inviting people to information sessions, you're asking for introductions, you're going down the, like you said, the path of least resistance. And that's where your fundraising comes from, is these connections. And so it's not complete strangers, but it's looking at how we can grow relationships. I mean, going to networking events, getting introductions, inviting people in before we ask. That's good fundraising, but it's also easier fundraising. It's easier than calling 100 people in a day that have never heard of you.
Exactly. And it feels better, right? Like this is the thing. This is where all of those myths or bad feelings about fundraising come from, is this misperception around what successful and good fundraising looks like, which is meaningful and connected and engaging instead of soul-sucking and begging.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Do you still love fundraising? Do you still get a kick out of it?
I do. I really do. I do less like direct fundraising now that I run a consulting business, but I actually see, business development as a consultant very similar to the fundraising, which is, people need help or they want to create change in the world, and it's finding those people that we can help. And I see fundraising as matchmaking and really being able to pull together a person or a company that wants to have an impact with an organization that is having that impact. And I don't know, I can't think of anything better. And we get to see the most generous side of people, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, you're connecting. I mean, that's life. If you can connect two people or two groups of people who are both trying to achieve something, and they both achieve their goals out of it, then that's a wonderful thing.
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to do here. Everyone in the world wants to make the world a better place, whatever that looks like to them. And so if you can find the ones who it lines up with the work you're doing, then that's good fundraising. It makes it really easy, and people are happy to give.
Exactly. I want to talk for a little bit about the actual, now that we've built relationships and understood our organization and our donors, what kind of fundraising tactics people should be engaging with or implementing. Because I feel, we've all heard, such and such organization has an amazing gala that raises $1 million, or this, everyone's moving to digital, or you need a Twitter strategy. It's really easy to look outside and say, okay, we need to aim for the stars, and anything short of that just we're not competing or we're not cutting it. How do you, taking those relationships as the base, how do you then figure out when it does come time to asking how you ask?
Yeah, I think it can be really tempting to compare yourself to the big national organizations and think, they've got a really amazing TV campaign, or they've got a celebrity, or they've got a huge event. Let's aim for that. But we have to be realistic. We don't have, as a small organization, you don't have the same audience that they do. You don't have the same budget that they do. You don't have the staff and time that they do. So we need to do it on a much smaller scale. But also realize that what your donors or potential donors are looking for, they're not looking for a big fancy TV campaign, or they're not looking for a celebrity. It just so happens that those organizations have those. What people actually want is they want to feel like they're making a difference, and they want to feel like the gift that they're making is going to help achieve what they set out to achieve. So on a small scale, as we deepen these relationships, what we're looking to do is figure out what these people want to do, what they want to see happen, what they want to see change, and then I suppose presenting the project or the work in front of them to show them, this is what we're going to do, that by giving this money, this is going to change someone's life or something. It's going to make an impact. And so it actually is kind of getting rid of all the glitz and glamour of these big galas and these big TV ads, and actually just connecting with people in the way that they want to hear from you, connecting with them as humanly as possible, and just asking them, just showing them exactly what it is that their gift could do, and outright asking them. And that can be scary, but sometimes it's a lot simpler than you think. It's just about putting the project, putting the story, putting the case for support in front of the right person's eyes. And so much of the work has been done at this relationship stage that when you actually get to that one sentence or one email or one meeting, which is asking, they already love you. They already love you. They already trust you. They already understand you. And that ask is almost like a formality.
And you're asking in a way that's comfortable for them, because you've taken all their feedback and actually took action on it, right? Like, I think that we, taking that information and figuring out, okay, like if all your donors are over 80, that's going to inform the kind of fundraising you're doing or how you're going to ask. If all your donors are in their teens, you're going to do something different. So I think having all those elements that you describe and then figuring out what the right trigger is for your audience, like meeting them where they are, you can't go wrong, I think.
Yeah.
That's sort of the combination or magic about it.
Well, we have a really amazing gift as human beings in that we adapt to who we're talking to. So, if I'm talking to an 80-year-old man versus talking to a 30-year-old woman like yourself, if I'm just having a conversation like that, then I'll change the language I use, I'll change the words, I'll change the topic. And as a human, I do that very naturally. But then in fundraising, sometimes we forget about that and we send out an email to 1,000 different people and it says exactly the same thing. Or we send out, a single corporate proposal, we send exactly the same one to all, 100 different companies. But actually, if we take a step back and try and understand the person or group of people we're talking to a bit better, we can adapt and we can be much more human about it. I mean, corporate proposals are a great example that your corporate proposal shouldn't be written until you've spoken to the company, because then you know what they're trying to achieve, then you know what they're interested in, then you know a lot more about them, and your proposal reflects that. Whereas usually we end up writing the proposal first, and then it's like just making all these assumptions about what they want that of course it's going to fall onto deaf ears because it's not them, it's not written for them.
Exactly. It's not meaningful, it's not engaging, and it's a lot more work.
I mean, it's funny because you work with mainly small charities, as do I, and small charities have such an advantage sometimes because it's so personal. And I like to think, if you're a nonprofit and you only had one donor, your communications would be amazing, wouldn't they? Because you'd know exactly when they want to hear from you. You'd know exactly what they want to hear about. You'd know the medium. It would just be very easy. So it should be easy as we get bigger, because we do the same thing for each person. But instead, what happens is we not get lazy, but we get distracted, and then we end up sending the same blanket stuff to everyone. But if we can try and keep that kind of understanding of every person on our database as best as possible, then we'll be giving them what they want, and they're going to feel like they're really connected to us on a human level.
Amazing. I want to share one resource that we have for people, because I think once you do all this that we've talked about, figuring out then where to prioritize those actions can be, it shouldn't be that complicated now that you have all that information, but we created kind of like a cheat sheet that people can download that sort of lists all the different fundraising strategies, and you can say, okay, what are we working with? And then how does that match with like fundraising events or direct mail or email or all these different fundraising tactics. So if listeners want, they can go to thegoodpartnership.com/guide, and it will help you take all this information and put it into a fundraising action, put it into action. But I want to also, you and I have talked about this idea of testing and, taking action, and it's okay that it's not a perfectly clear or straight path, that you're not going to get it right out of the gate, and that's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think especially in the early days of your fundraising, you don't necessarily know what works best. And I think that's key to say what works best, because really I believe every form of fundraising works, just most of them are going to be really, really slow. And so as a small organization, what you're trying to do is test the different avenues, have a lot of conversations, just put stuff out there as much as possible. And then you're going to see what starts to get, catch fire a little bit. And that's where you start to put your time into. And so much of fundraising in the early days is just time management. It's figuring out, okay, where do I carve up my time? How much time do I spend on the phone to donors? How much time do I spend on social media? And I think we have to be really brutal and realistic in those days and think, okay, is this going to go anywhere? Or is this just a waste of time? Or is this good for the short term while this is good for the long term? So we need to keep doing it. But in the early days, you're balancing your time with lots of other stuff, and it's hard. It can be really stressful. So it is about testing, but also just kind of keeping an eye on things and making sure you're using your time wisely with things that work. You don't have to do everything, but everything that you're doing needs to be moving forward.
How do you balance that with patience? So, or maybe the other question is like, what does working look like when you do it the first time? Because sometimes a strategy might be fantastic and it might work a little bit. But again, if your expectations are like crazy high, sometimes it takes patience. And so how do you evaluate if it's like working and just needs more time, or if it's not working and you need to move on?
I think it's about having a clear plan and strategy. And, maybe that involves talking to experts or talking to your peers to kind of see where this is going. But say, for example, going to networking events. Networking events for me, I think is a key role in a fundraiser's strategy. It's getting out there and it's meeting more people and having conversations and getting more people on the radar. Now, at the end of a networking event, you don't feel like you've raised money. But ideally, what you do have is maybe 5 people or 10 people that are new in your life, and what the next step is with them. You're going to try and meet them again or invite them out for coffee. So that I think there's like micro targets on the way, which are, I want to have this many conversations. I want to get this many emails onto my mailing list, stuff that isn't financial. So it's the micro targets, but it's also having a clear path that I know I want this person to meet me for a second time. I know that I'm going to try and then invite them to an event. I know that I'm then going to put a proposal in front of them, whatever the steps are. So as long as they're moving down that, up that ladder or down that line, and as long as you're kind of, it's growing and you're being productive, even if it's not financial in those terms, then it's going the right way. And so, yes, there's a little bit of patience in that because it's not raising money straight away, but you see a clear path where a percentage of those people are going to turn into money.
Amazing.
Does that make sense?
That makes, I agree. I think it's a little bit of, balancing. I absolutely, seeking advice and feedback from people who have experience, and again, continued feedback from your donors. One of the things that I did very early on in my career as a sole fundraiser at a small shop was connect with other people who were sole fundraisers in a small shop, so that it wasn't like me trying to figure out all these things on my own, but that they were going through very similar experiences. And so, if you have no professional development budget, if you can't pay for expert help, there are still people around you who can be thoughtful and thorough in their feedback and help guide you or help be that point of testing. But yes, it takes a combination of patience and sticking with it, but also learning when to let go. And those micro goals, I think, are so important in that, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's key what you're saying there about meeting other like your peers, because fundraisers are generally really generous with their time and resources. I mean, I know like you put out a lot of resources for free. You put out, your podcast and everything for free. There's a lot of learning there that, we don't have to make the mistakes that have already been made. We can learn from the experts. But in the past, I've had experiences where it's like, can I see your grant proposal? And a fundraiser will just send it across.
Yeah.
Or can I see the document that you use for your volunteers, the contract that you use for volunteers and things like this, or the job description? And people just send it. Yeah. And I know if anyone asks me if it's no skin off my nose, then absolutely I'll share anything I already know about a situation. Exactly. And that's one of the things I love about the sector is just how generous fundraisers are.
I feel like that's a beautiful note to end on. I also know we're out of time. But yeah, I think that's, we all come to this from a place of generosity, as do our donors, as do the, frontline workers and programming staff, and everyone in our sector, I think, is here because we care and because we have generous souls, and remembering that of our donors as well, I think, is really important.
That's very beautiful.
Where I always ask, and I'm happy to share as well, where can people find out more about you and your resources?
Yes, so as I said, my name is Simon Scriver, and the best place to find me is at changefundraising.com, where you'll find my podcast and links and things like that. I'm also on Twitter at Toast Fundraiser. But yeah, I'm always happy to answer questions or chat with people if anyone wants to connect. Please do come over to my podcast as well if you're a Cindy fan. And now, Cindy, where do my lovely listeners find you?
Absolutely. So the Small Nonprofit podcast is co-presented by The Good Partnership, which is my company, and CharityVillage, which if you're in Canada, you will have heard of them. They are basically the largest job posting site for our sector. On our website, thegoodpartnership.com, you can find all the podcast episodes, as well as you mentioned, other free resources and tools, and we love sharing stuff. So sign up for our email there. And then social, we're on Instagram, The Good Partnership. We are on Facebook as The Good Partnership, sort of on Twitter at Good Partners Inc., I think. But yeah, you can find us all over the place, but email is always the best way to get the most value from what we share.
So sign up to your mailing list and get your free resources, and do listen to. I love your podcast. I think yours is my second favorite podcast.
From yours, okay. Yeah. Likewise, yeah. Yours is my second favorite. No, I agree. We are both. We both come to this and to you, our listeners, from a place of wanting to share and uplift our sector. So it's always delightful to talk.
Yeah. And I hope we get to chat again soon. I hope we can do this again.
Definitely.
You've been listening to Simon Scriver's Amazingly Ultimate Fundraising Superstar podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and head over to changefundraising.com to learn more or get in touch with Simon. Or don't. Whatever. You're big enough to make your own decisions.
Hello, this is Morgan Freeman. For discounts on Simon's best-selling online fundraising courses, go to www.changefundraising.com/training and use coupon code podcast. Complete them in your own time, wherever you want. Get busy living or get busy buying.